Parents skipped my husband's funeral to attend my golden child sister's promotion party. Little did they know, Marks will left me more than enough to cut them off for good. My name is Ella, and for the past 2 years, I've been watching my husband Mark slowly fade away. When we first got the diagnosis of stomach cancer, I remember feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. Mark was only 38, successful in his investment banking career, and we had a beautiful 9-year-old son, Ethan. We were supposed to have decades ahead of us. The one small blessing in this nightmare was that Mark's financial success meant we could afford the best treatment available. We flew to specialists across the country, tried experimental therapies, and spared no expense. But as the months dragged on, it became clear that all this treatment was just buying time, not offering a cure. Through it all, Mark's parents, Linda and Robert, were our rocks. They lived just 20 minutes away and stepped in without hesitation when things got tough. Ella, we'll pick Ethan up from school today, Linda would say on days when Mark was scheduled for treatment. Don't worry about dinner, either. I've made extra lasagna. Ethan would often tug on my sleeve when I tucked him in at night, his eyes wide with hope and fear. Mom, when is Dad going to get better? I never knew what to say. How do you tell a child that his father is dying? So I just stroked his hair and said, the doctors are trying their best, sweetie. My own parents, on the other hand, were a different story. My mother Karen and my father David lived just as close as Mark's parents, but they might as well have been on another planet. Mom, can you pick up Ethan from school today? Mark has a bad reaction to the chemo, and Linda has a doctor's appointment. Oh, Ella, so sorry, but we promised to help your sister with her apartment hunting today. You know how Jessica gets when she's stressed. It was always Jessica. It had been that way my entire life. When I was 7, my parents missed my school play because Jessica had a cold. When I graduated high school, they left right after the ceremony to get to Jessica's dance recital, even though she was just in the ensemble. I'd gotten used to it over the years. Mark became my family, and his parents treated me more like a daughter than my own ever did. So when Mark's condition took a turn for the worse last month, I braced myself for the end, surrounded by the family that had chosen me. The night Mark died, I was holding his hand. His breathing had become shallow hours before, and the hospice nurse had warned me it wouldn't be long. Ella, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Take care of Ethan. You're the strongest person I know. Those were his last words. I sat there for hours after, still holding his hand as it grew cold, unable to process that my partner of 12 years was gone. Linda and Robert arrived at the hospital within an hour of my call, their faces etched with the same grief that was consuming me. We're here, sweetheart, Linda said, wrapping her arms around me. We'll always be here. That night, I sent a text to my mother, Mark passed away tonight. Her response came an hour later, it's terrible. No call, no offer to come over, no question about how Ethan and I were doing. Just 2 words. But I was too numb to care. There was a funeral to plan, a son to console, and a life to somehow piece back together. The days after Mark's death passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, paperwork, and trying to explain to Ethan that his father wasn't coming home. Linda and Robert were there every step of the way, handling calls to the funeral home when I couldn't form words and sitting with Ethan when he had questions I couldn't answer. The day before the funeral, I was drowning in details. The funeral home needed final decisions on the program, distant relatives were calling for directions, and I still needed to pick up Ethan's suit. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since Mark died. I need to ask my parents to watch Ethan, I told Linda as we sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by sympathy cards. You and Robert are already doing so much. I drove Ethan to my parents' house, rehearsing what I would say when we arrived. My mother opened the door, wearing a light jacket, purse already in hand. Ella, this isn't a good time, she said, not even inviting us in. We just heading out. Mom, please, it's just for a few hours. I have to finalize everything for the funeral. We can't cancel now, my father cut in, appearing behind my mother. We've had these plans for weeks. Before I could argue further, they both stepped outside, locking the door behind them. We really have to go, my mother said firmly. I'm sure you can find someone else. They hurried to their car without so much as a goodbye to Ethan, who stood there, confused and hurt.